Mr. Narayana Murthy, who has sparked a controversy after advocating for a 70-hour work week for young Indians. Mr. Narayana Murthy, the iconic founder of Infosys, while having a conversation with the co-founder of Zerodha, Mr. Nikhil Kamath, at the Bengaluru Tech Summit, Mr. Narayana Murthy, in that conversation, has advocated for 3 shifts a day, especially for workers in India's construction and infrastructure industry. That's what Mr. Narayana Murthy has spoken of, as if there wasn't enough debate about the 70-hour work week, which technically still continues. We're yet to be done with the 70-hour work week debate. And then comes these comments on 3 shifts a day. And the social media reactions really tell you the situation. The first reactions were, yes, give us 3 times the salary. We will do 3 shifts a day. But Karthik, really, 3 shifts a day?
Krishna, I think Mr. Murthy is living in that oops, I did it again moment. But I'm not sure if he has really, spoken accurately what he really wanted to, what was really running in his mind. To my mind, I think Mr. Murthy should have meant, if not would have meant, he should have meant that infrastructure sector needs to work 3 shifts a day. Not each employee in the construction business should be working 3 days a week, 3 shifts a day. So I think Mr. Murthy is suggesting that just constructing India's large infrastructure projects in 1 8-hour shift in a day is not going to cut it. So primarily rotate people, get them in shifts, add more manpower to every project. Now, I think there are more questions that arise with that how do companies afford more people, and how do you get more people on your payrolls, or even if these are daily wage earners, how do you get your employee cost to go up 3 times? But the point really being that even a project which is supposed to run, let's say, 3 years can be completed in 1 year if you triple the amount of manpower that goes into it. So the cost is actually going to be pretty much the same. I feel that is what Mr. Murthy should have or would have meant by his 3 shifts a day comment. But of course, social media being social media.
Would have, could have, should have was also mentioned during that entire 70-hour work week controversy that got sparked. And yet again, here we find ourselves now, less than a month from there. We have Mr. Dilip Cherian incidentally joining us on this broadcast. Dilip, great to have you here on the show. Simple question to you. Is this case of boomers versus zoomers going too far? Because one is to justify this logic of wanting to have greater productivity. I don't think that is lost on any of us. But the question again always is, does productivity always get measured in terms of number of shifts and number of hours that one puts in?
There's one school of thought which says that Narayana Murthy in the colloquial of India, Satya Gaya. But I think that there's a deep point that he's trying to make. India's infrastructure projects are moving far too slowly. We have far too many regulations and controls as far as being able to work in a flexi time model is concerned. And by flexi time, I don't mean sitting 6 hours at home and working 2 hours in the office. I mean projects and industries which need to have so many permissions to actually function effectively on a 24-hour basis. Narayana Murthy is probably pointing at those. If that is what he meant, he's doing well. I don't think that he's that silly as to suggest that individuals should work for 3 shifts a day. That will just lower productivity. But the fact that there is a huge capital cost, because every infrastructure project you make in this country involves intensive capital expenditure. If that expenditure can be made to be fructifying into real assets much faster, then that would make a huge difference. Narayana Murthy's comments ought to be taken in the context that India is probably embarked on one of the most large investment projects in the world. I was recently in Abu Dhabi and I saw that major construction projects have permissions to go on for 24 hours. Now that makes a huge difference in countries which are trying to play catch up.
Okay. But then you obviously have environmental concerns, pollution concerns if construction goes on 24 hours a day. We are in pollution
concerns.
Sound concerns, there's enough and more. Okay, I'm going to bring this back to this entire working, because if you see the reactions on social media, Dilip, it's all about young people asking the older people questions on why do you have to judge us now in terms of how much work we put in. I have a counter question. A lot of questions are raised on what is the starter's salary. Why hasn't that changed in 2 decades at Infosys? And think about it, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, somebody starting off small can have hopes of buying a house very quickly. Imagine somebody who's 20-something right now, starting off with a salary, questions being raised on their knowledge and productivity, etc., and they have absolutely no hope of owning anything, especially a house. Because some of the simplest milestones that were available to Mr. Narayana Murthy's generation and the nearby generations are not available to the current Gen Z and including mine on, millennials to Gen Zs. Isn't it, Mr. Cherian?
That is a huge problem. That is a global problem, in fact. Most estimates across the world suggest that as far as Gen Z is concerned and a couple of previous generations, they're going to find it harder and harder to be able to acquire the assets that previous generations had. And yet, there is no getting away from the fact that these generations are working on the backs of the benefits that their parents and previous generations had earned. So you will find that while ambitions and hopes remain high, costs have gone through the roof. And unfortunately, the brutal law of corporate existence is that you will pay what you need to pay and not pay what others want you to pay. Now, if
you just reverse that, Mr. Cherian. Sorry, before you go ahead, you just reverse it for a second. I know you're making a very good point. The Gen Zs are saying we will work as much as we need to work and not a second more. This is the response that will come.
You are right. And in fact, that is a problem that corporate India is facing today. We need to recognize that Gen Z doesn't feel the need to work that long. Gen Z doesn't have the same commodity and product aspirations that others have. They're quite happy living in Airbnbs or versions of that. And the shared economy is coming out as a result of this as a in a sense, inevitable kind of social change. And that may change the way corporates have to deal with today's generation of workers. Yes, there's going to be a problem. And the answer is that we don't have the answers yet.
Mr. Cherian, if I can step into this conversation and bring it back perhaps to infrastructure, and that is the core sector this time, attracting the ire of Mr. Narayana Murthy.
Fair enough. In fact, I thought this entire thing began with Mr. Narayana Murthy's own concerns about Bengaluru, and the Bengaluru metro, and look where it led up to.
So my point being, Mr. Cherian, that every now and then there are these big ticket projects that get sanctioned, that get action, and there is always a contract and there is always a timeline. I think flexibility of timelines is actually the bigger problem than infrastructure companies, construction companies getting people to work overtime or undertime. And there are some projects that are in fact getting completed in record time.
Yes.
The Noida airport being one. I mean, hopefully it does kick off in 2024, early 2025, whatever the deadline is. But look at, talking about Delhi NCR, look at the Ashram flyover, 3 months flat. This wasn't the pace of construction, the rate at which large infrastructure projects were built. Even the highways, even the expressways that we are seeing flourish in this country right now are actually being built in record time. The problem, I feel, is limited to certain states, certain specific projects within states. And Bengaluru traffic, we all know. How do you stall traffic in a city as crowded as Bengaluru for 24 hours a day?
You brought it back.
Obviously, your construction will have to happen in the wee hours of the night when the traffic situation can be managed to build those roads.
Oh, Karthik, you just brought it back to something even more basic than the frustration of not watching the Bengaluru metro rail project being completed on time, is the fact that both Mr. Narayana Murthy and Mr. Kamath, who he was in conversation with, had to fight great traffic to get to this Bengaluru Tech Summit in the first place, Mr. Cherian. The problem begins there.
And they're not the only ones. Remember what happened with Trevor Noah when he was visiting Bangalore?
Yeah.
And the people who were there to attend that particular event did not make it. I mean, the event did not happen for a different reason altogether. But infrastructure, of course, is a much larger challenge, and infrastructure construction building is a much larger challenge than just working 3 hours, 3 shifts in a day.
Right, Mr. Cherian, I'm guessing it all began, the thoughts would begin when you're stuck in that Bengaluru traffic, which has become infamous across the country, Bengaluru traffic per se. But then again, it is all about those crucial projects which can ease these concerns and the pace at which those crucial infrastructure projects are being completed.
How many of you haven't watched a construction project which moves at a snail's pace? I have passed by numerous ones where you find two people working on a construction site. It just boggles the mind. What are the others doing? And why isn't more work going on in different stretches, aside from, of course, the time taken to cure cement? But
But Mr.
having
Cherian,
said that, I think
isn't that actually a problem of contracting, of putting enough penalties in place? And does the onus for infrastructure companies, construction companies to not complete projects in time actually lie even with governments, both state and central governments? You've got to tighten the screws to get them to deliver. And only once you tighten those screws will they actually find it viable to increase the number of shifts and the number of people working in each shift.
you've got to tighten the screws, you've got to think outside the box, and you've got to come up with solutions which are part of what makes India great. As far as Bangalore traffic is concerned, it is now not just a national shame, but global companies are now worrying about whether they can continue to be located in Bangalore because of the sheer downtime involved in any set of meetings that they want to get past during the course of a day. It's impossible to do three meetings if you have to do three parts of the city. Not possible.
Right. My only solution would be that, as somebody from born and raised in Chennai, just move some of that stuff to Chennai. Much better traffic as compared to Bengaluru, a big city, one of the oldest metropolitan cities in this country. I think it's all about diversifying even within the south. You've seen the way Hyderabad is coming up, the way Kochi is coming up. So solutions will lie in not overcrowding Bengaluru, both in terms of immigration and in terms of the amount of work. Software exports, 30% of software exports coming in from Bengaluru, as Mr. Narayana Murthy is talking about. But Shirin, this has been a fascinating conversation with you. I'm guessing this conversation is now going to end over here as far as work weeks and Gen Z work culture is concerned.